Hello and welcome to Cars and Popcorn. We are back here for season 2. I'm, of course, your host, Tom, and today we're starting exactly how we started last season, but this time with fancy new microphones and equipment. And I'm less terrible at this hosting. It's terrible. We are talking, of course, about Bond, just like we did at the start. And to make things less terrible for everyone, I've got a couple of great fellows here to talk about Bond with me. First up, you know him from his Research and Destroy podcast. He's fought and beaten me on Fan Friction. He's Bill Cariola. How you doing, Bill?
Good. How you doing? I also have new microphones, so everything's like super professional over here. So
We're so fancy today, and
we really are. Yeah.
And speaking of fancy, we've got a guy with his own column on MotoIQ today, Curly's Corner. Our special guest, you know him, you love him. You know him as Curly. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. And while it looks like I have a new microphone, this microphone's actually like 25 years old, but the stand is new. So there's still new technology going on here too.
Yeah, the thing about audio equipment I find is that a lot of the technology from 10, 20 years ago is just as strong or stronger than a lot of today's. So your microphone's pretty legit, I'm sure.
Oh, it works just fine. Great. It's the one that I had. And I was actually going to use it during the Mad Max show, but trying to hold it and juggle the tablet and juggle the mouse is just not possible. So I invested in a stand, and now we're all set to go.
All right. So, guys, we're here talking about Bond again, and there were 3 Bonds that I think we kind of neglected the last time. We focused a lot on Connery, a lot on the DB5, and a lot on the late Roger Moore. But we got Dalton, we got Craig, we got Pierce, and so we got 3 guys to represent them. So, Bill, I know you want to talk a bit about Dalton, so what's your favorite or most noteworthy car from Timothy Dalton?
Is probably the only car he really drove, which was the V8 Vantage Volante, I believe, if I'm saying that correctly. Which is fun because this is actually the first Aston Martin that was used since On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It's a nice little car, went from 0 to 60 in 5.3 seconds, had a top speed of 170. And I know that, funny enough, they decided to do this late, like very late into production. For some reason, they were going back and forth, and they thought with a new Bond, they wanted to go more serious. They wanted to move away from the campiness of the Roger Moore era. But they also wanted to, at the same time, make it very familiar. So they actually approached Aston Martin, and they said, "Hey, we want to use one of your cars again." And they didn't really have any on hand, so the production team actually had to go out and buy 3 of them themselves. And those were the ones that were used for the driving scenes. They used 11 total, actually, for this film production. And so one of them was the driving car, one of them was the stunt car, and the other one was the special effects car. And there was also another one that was just like a fiberglass mock-up. It had a steerable chassis, but it had no engine in it. And funny enough, the first one they use in filming in the earlier scenes where he's driving around with, Diablo, is a convertible. Actually has the top. And that was the car that was given to the production. It was actually Aston Martin chairman's Victor Gauntlet's car. It was his personal car that he let him use. And so they had to switch out. So that's why there's a scene in the middle where he goes to Q branch and they're winterizing it, which is basically changing it to a hardtop. And that put that in there to explain why they're moving away from the convertible to the hardtop for later scenes in the movie. So,
and of course, probably doing other winterizing things such as tires and I'm sure some other things from the 70s. But I believe another fun fact about that car is later in the film, they actually had a 4-door version involved that was apparently difficult to see, but was there for some of the stunts.
Mm-hmm.
That might have been the mock-up you were talking about.
Yeah. Yep. So it was funny enough. One of the mock-ups they were using for the jump on the ramp, where like one of the stunt cars had like the built-in propulsion system, and it was supposed to just jump a ramp and fly right over this like little enclosure and down over the other side. But the only problem was it was so cold when they were filming the nitrous propulsion. It didn't work right. It was so cold, and the car barely left the ramp and crashed into this like mock-up building. And they were like, "All right, we got to get like blowtorches. We got to get heaters." So they're like, "You know what? Let's try to keep it warm overnight, and we'll try this again tomorrow." So they had to put it in this garage and like crank the heat up and keep like space heaters on it, so like the components wouldn't freeze to the point where it wouldn't work. And then they were finally able to the next day. They got it out and first try, shot it right over.
British engineering, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
British engineering. And moving on to
It's
Curly.
interesting you bring up.
It's
Interesting you bring up that James Bond decided with Living Daylights to go back to the Aston Martin, because that was kind of a pivotal point for Aston Martin themselves, because they really hadn't had any major hits since the DB5. Again, James Bond back in Goldfinger, and they'd had another one in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but they were kind of in a weird state. They'd been sold a couple of times. They made the Lagonda, which was really ridiculous, insane, over the top. It was basically a concept car that somehow they put into production and then put it into production very badly. So this was sort of Aston Martin's V8 advantage there, sort of return to a desirable, big, British sports car. So it was really nice that it coincided with Living Daylights. It's sort of perfect timing for both Aston Martin and the James Bond franchise to come back together.
Yeah, most definitely.
The advantage is just an awesome car. It is the British equivalent of a Mustang, except even more insane.
It does in fact resemble a Mustang a bit. It looks like an American muscle car, but somehow more refined because British. Now, Curly, you and I grew up in the middle of a certain era, and I believe your favorite Bond is Pierce Brosnan, if I remember correctly.
You are correct.
And I believe I know the answer to this question and have it queued up, but what's your favorite car from Pierce?
My favorite car from Pierce is the car that I would argue is the best Bond car ever. It's not my favorite Bond car ever, but it's the best one. And I think I mentioned this actually when we did Bond before, and it's the BMW 750 IL. And I love it because it is, first of all, if you look at the gadgets, that car was, or that movie came out in 1997. A lot of those gadgets are real today. Like if you buy a Tesla, it can drive to you, or actually a BMW i8. You can pull out your phone and it will drive to you. You can get, it's not really a thing on passenger cars, but you can have systems where your tires will reinflate and fix themselves. So there's all the cool gadgets that 20 years ago were totally science fiction, but today are real. Plus the fact that of all the cars that Bond has ever been given by MI6, that's the one that blends in. And I think we said it before, in a German garage, that car does not stand out at all. It's a silver BMW in a sea of silver Mercedes-Benzes. So it's the perfect spy car. It blends in.
You basically think it's just some rich asshole being driven around by his driver.
Yeah, exactly. So, like an Aston Martin or a Lotus Esprit, they all stand out really, really. It doesn't matter what color they are. You see one of those cars and go, ooh, that's really cool. But a giant, comfortable luxury sedan blends in. It's the perfect spy car.
I'd argue the perfect spy car is Kingsman with the London Taxi, but that's a whole nother topic at hand.
But that car also didn't have a twin turbocharged V12 engine.
We don't know that. It made some pretty strange sounds during the sequel. We don't know what was in there.
The other thing is I also love that whole car chase, and I love that. So that's I think that is my favorite Bond movie, is Tomorrow Never Dies. And I actually got, and I don't have it with me right now. It's still at my parents' house, but I bought this like expanded box set on VHS. You know, it's really, really old school. And they actually had the script in there, and they had all these lines from the car, you know, talking about please drive carefully as he's being shot at. It's there's a lot of sort of like campy humor in there, but it's also a really good car chase. And of course, the ending is beautiful, where he just ramps the thing off the parking garage right into the Avis rental place.
I mean, hey, at least he returned the car. I mean, so.
Yeah, and it might have even had most of a full tank of gas.
Yeah. So.
And if he got the insurance, then he's all kind of off the hook. It's running. That's what they're asking for.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
I mean, it ran when it landed. I don't know if it kept running after it stopped moving. Yeah.
Not important. He got it back. He made it. All right, and of course, the third Bond that we neglected last time, Daniel Craig. I've been very open in my criticisms of Daniel Craig, and I believe they're 100% warranted in the later films. But as I went through a rewatch, I kind of forgot how great he was in the first Bond, in his first outing, which was Casino Royale. Probably one of my favorite Bond movies, mostly because I really enjoyed poker at the time. And I think he was one of the few that had a consistent Bond car throughout his run, which I found to be kind of interesting. Other than the DB5 that they kept going back to several times, he drove an Aston Martin DBS throughout all of his movies, actually. And first off, I think the DBS is probably one of the best looking new cars today. It's not a supercar by any stretch of the imagination, but it is quite fast. And it too has an interesting story that we may have gone over the last time, but we're going to go over again, which was it took the Guinness World Record from Top Gear for the most times of a nitrogen cannon flip, because they couldn't get that big heavy Aston gripping the road to flip. They shot it. They thought, it'll flip 5 times. We'll be all good. And it happened to flip 7 times, which was one more than Top Gear's record, which Grand Tour, Amazon, how have you not broken that at this point? That is the ultimate question.
Well, Tom, they tried to in the season opener, but apparently they didn't put a air cannon under Richard Hammond's car.
There was no.
There is a reason that Craig has only driven the Aston Martin DBS. It's because Bond and Aston Martin have this product placement deal, and Aston Martin hasn't come out with a new car since the DBS came out. It's the only car they friggin' make.
Whoa!
Well, they made the V8 Vantage, but it's not as nice. So
they do make the Vanquish. They do still make the Vanquish. They're brand
really?
new one. They do.
Oh, the new one. That's right. But the one that Brosnan drove, they have put out of production, haven't they? I think they put that one out of production.
Yeah, the one that Brosnan drove was out of production, but there is a new Vanquish, and there is now a DB11, which is different than the DB10 that Bond drove in Spectre, which I'm sure we'll get to later.
But let's be fair, Aston Martin really just makes one car. They just put a different body on top and call it something else.
And I would honestly think the less said about Spectre, the better. So, yikes! I did not care for that one.
And yet, that is not the worst Bond movie that Daniel Craig has been.
Yeah, I would put Quantum of Solace, only because it was just largely forgettable and kind of. It was, especially after Casino Royale, it was kind of a letdown.
That movie more than anything else was a huge fault of the writer's strike. I watched that movie last night, and I do not remember much of what happens. There's some crap about Quantum. They are everywhere, which they later just retconned into Spectre. But there was a really sweet chase at the beginning. A completely
friggin' see.
Shaky cam.
Cut! Face shot! Move, jerk, dive, dodge. Do you feel like you're in the middle of this chase yet?
I do, Curly. But, they had to do something to make these alphas look at all like their little 250 horsepower V6s can keep up with a V12 Aston Martin DBS. They had to do something, Curly.
Yeah, they put traffic in there.
And shaky cam, so you feel the traffic.
That was just... Yeah, the less said about that, the better. I will say, though, so I dug out, just for this episode, I dug out my big, happy, really beat-up book of Bond stories, and inside of it is the actual short story of Quantum of Solace. And I know that the plot of Quantum of Solace, the movie, is something about water. The plot of Quantum of Solace, the Ian Fleming short story, literally the opening line is, I've always thought if I ever married, I would marry an air hostess. And then, so James Bond says that to the governor of Nassau, because that was a big setting for the early Bond books. And the entire story is the governor of Nassau saying, no, that's a horrible idea. Here's a story from a friend of mine who got completely screwed over by an air hostess. And by the end of that story, which is 20 or so pages long, Bond says, yeah, okay, maybe that's not a good idea.
Wow, so
that's Quantum of Solace. And that would probably have made a better movie.
I mean, it would have made a shorter movie. That was the actual Quantum of Solace was, like you said, about an hour and a half of something about water and something about quantum. I just watched this movie last night, folks. I still don't understand what happened.
I mean, I won't stay too much on the books because, there's always that argument about books versus movies. But what I think is interesting is in some of these short stories, and they're all Bond-based, is how many elements ended up in actual movies. So, for example, the fishery and License to Kill, that actually comes straight out of a short story, and that character, I can't remember his name, Cramp or something like that. Crest, Milton Crest. He's a character out of another completely different Bond short story. So I thought it was kind of cool how they would sort of pick out different elements from Ian Fleming and incorporate them into a larger. But with Quantum of Solace, they just took the title and nothing else.
They kind of do that a lot.
Yeah, well, and that's okay. But again, I think it's cool how they will pull out various bits and pieces of Fleming's work and then put them in. And if you know both source material, then it's neat to see how they overlap.
I certainly do not know the source material. I've not read through most of those books, but I did notice one thing that you'll enjoy, Curly, since I believe these are one of the weird Japanese cars that you love. There's a little Suzuki Sidekick that pops up in a random bike scene.
Yep.
It's one of the few notable things that I found about Quantum of Solace as I looked through the cars that were in it. It's pretty sad when a little Suzuki SUV is made my list for that movie.
Can you go back to that shot real quick?
I certainly can.
So that truck on the right, I'm pretty sure that was a production truck that they didn't get out of shot.
Oh God!
I think you're right. There's probably the best reason for the rope hanging there.
Oh God, that's Diamonds Are Forever bad. That's bad. Oh.
I mean, I don't know if it actually is or not, but I think that's a better story than whatever they could come up with.
Yeah.
There was.
Oh God, I hated Quantum of Solace. I really did.
Yeah, A View to a Kill for me was it had its moments, but it was a crappy Bond movie. There's just nothing redeeming about Quantum of Solace. Even the car chase, which is the best part of the movie, still has major faults. Most notably, the fact that you just can't tell what the hell's going on. At least A View to a Kill had
Walken.
It had Christopher Walken. Yeah, Christopher Walken.
It did have Christopher Walken.
Yeah, Christopher Walken. It had a Duran Duran theme song.
It was actually pretty good.
Yep. It's actually a funny little piece of trivia. The theme song for A View to a Kill, written by Duran Duran, is the only Bond theme to reach #1 on the U.S. Billboard charts.
I believe that. Duran Duran was huge back then.
Yeah, but I mean, not Wings, not anything else. It's insane.
That is pretty insane considering that Skyfall had Adele.
Yeah.
And Casino Royale had Chris Cornell?
Did have Chris Cornell, which was probably actually might be my favorite Bond theme, Casino Royale.
It's a really good one. It is. I'm really not a fan of Casino Royale, and I have to be honest. Mostly, it's the scene where he gets his nuts beaten.
Oh.
Like, by the way, I want to go on a very short tangent here. How many times has James Bond been? How many times has someone tried to kill him dick first? Because that's a really, like, if you think about it in the context of the James Bond world, that's a very specific and kind of odd scenario. Basically, all of his enemies know that he is a ladies' man and know that if they chop off his wiener, that is the worst thing they could do to him, and that's the worst way to torture him. Because, I mean, Goldfinger, they tried to kill him dick first. Casino Royale, they tried to kill him dick first. I'm sure in, like, probably A License to Kill, they tried to, like, get a shark to eat him dick first. Like, yeah, I mean, that's a really weird way to try to kill somebody. I mean, I'm sure we could do a whole show about that. I'm sorry, I had to bring that up.
I don't know if I want to do a whole show about James Bond going dick first in anything. So.
Yeah, that gets real weird.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, you know what? I'm sure there's some like Rule 34 fan fiction out on that. I don't want to read it. So.
I just thought it's kind of weird. He's a spy and everything. Like, how do they know about his love life? Is that something that's like part of his dossier, like list or something?
I feel like that's just one thing that's kind of a reputation type thing, where Bond's got that reputation even to his enemies.
Yeah, and to be fair, he has slept with most of his enemies' wives or lovers, so some of that might be deserved. It's still kind of weird to think about. Like, as the audience, we know that he's a ladies' man, and we know that by the time he's been captured, he's slept with like 5 women. But it's still kind of weird to think that the enemy's like, I should kill him genitals first.
So, funny enough, you bring that up because it was as I was doing some research on the Living Daylights. One of the other things I wanted to do in that movie, other than kind of ground him a little more in reality, was make him somewhat monogamous, because this was the height of AIDS, and that whole thing was starting. So they made a point that in that movie, the cellist is the only person he is with the entire time, except for like the little cute thing in the beginning with the lady on the boat. But other than that, she is the only Bond girl for the rest of the film. So. I don't think that lasted very long, but yeah, that's what they wanted to do.
No, not at all. Especially once you got into the Craig era and he just had 2 or 3 per minute. I mean, movie.
Yeah, Brosnan was no slouch. So.
Yeah, Goldeneye. This is a perfect segue into Goldeneye. I mean, the opening car chase. So the first scene after the credits where he's in his beautiful Aston Martin DB5, and he's with his therapist of all people, and then he does the race against Zania on the top in her Ferrari. There's 2 women that one of them he absolutely sleeps with, and the other one he tries to, and then she tries to kill him. Like, there's 2 right there, and you're into the film. Yeah, it was a big change from Dalton.
Yeah, and that was a big change. I think Pierce was there to bring that ladies' man mentality back. Remember, this was the 90s. This was the time where American Pie hit its popularity, so sex definitely sold in the 90s. So
was there a time where sex didn't sell?
That's fair. That's fair. But the 90s, though, every comedy was a sex comedy in the 90s.
Yeah. Same thing with the early 80s. I mean, that was a huge thing. You had like Meatballs and The Last American Virgin, movies like that. But and
then he took a short break and then realized sex still sold.
Yeah, that could be a whole other show.
I'm sorry I brought us down this road, but I was doing the dishes today and I was like, thought just popped into my head. Like, how many times has someone tried to kill James Bond dick first?
And
so I'm sorry I brought it up, but I couldn't help it.
Oh, yeah.
It's fair. It's weird.
But honestly, so my original point was that's the big reason I don't like Casino Royale is, Bond has been captured, he's been beaten up, but that was the first time that he was just sort of brutally helpless. You know, there was absolutely no getting out of that. He should have died. So that whole thing just kind of, it was just a really weird kind of messed up scene. That turned me off to most of it.
I mean, that it was weird, but then again, DBS. The DBS was great.
Yeah.
So I do have a bunch of little fun notes on that since we've circled back around. So as I was reading up on it, producer Barbara Broccoli actually did a tour of the plant when trying to pick out the next car. So she met with Aston Martin, and it was actually marked as the DB9 before it became the DBS. And she saw it, and she's like, "That's it. That's the car. We want that." And in the interview, the people that worked at Aston Martin were like, "Oh, that's great." The problem was that thing wasn't even going to be ready to launch until 2007, and they didn't even have a working model. Like, the model they had was clay. So they had their prototype team work overtime, and they hand-built 2 working prototypes to give them for filming. To have the car ready. Yeah. They also had to build 3 more stunt cars for the flip scene that we were just talking about a little while ago. And another fascinating thing was the planning for that stunt took place in Dunsford Aerodrome, which is known as home of the Top Gear test track. So they actually tested it out on Top Gear's backyard.
And broke their own record.
So the flip, that whole thing was a complete accident. Because, so here's what's funny. They actually built an 8-inch ramp that they had to calculate. The car would have been like 8 inches, and the car would have been doing about 65 to get the flip to happen right. And they had one of the Aston Martins, one of the dummy ones, but they also used a BMW 5 Series E34 since it was similar in weight and size. And that's what they actually used on the test track to make the roll. And once they had it ready, they're like, all right, everything works. And they got the crew out. And the problem was that the Aston Martin was so damn stable, it wouldn't flip.
Damn you, grip. Damn you, grip and physics.
The low center of gravity, they were like, they had to raise it another 10 inches. The guy hit 70, and as soon as he hit it, the car leveled off. It landed back off the tires. So they're like, I don't know what the hell to do. So that's when they finally had to put the metal ram in the car that would pop it up and force it to flip. And they were just going, so they hit the ramp so fast and high, and because of that, that's why it ended up doing the whole 7 turns and stealing the record.
So it's kind of interesting that you said they built them DBS prototypes. I'm pretty sure the DB9 was sold at that point. I'm kind of surprised they didn't, and I'm glad they did that, didn't just rebadge a DB9, since it looks pretty similar to a DBS. They probably built it off of a DB9, and that's probably how they did it, changing some body components, but kind of surprised they didn't just rebadge a DB9, especially for the stunts. Yeah. That happens a lot in film.
And sometimes they just grab a whole different car and don't even bother to try to hide the fact that it's nowhere near what it was.
Looking at you, Chips. I hate Chips.
I still haven't seen it, so it didn't look very good.
Is that the one where they had the Chevy SS that turned into a Malibu?
It did turn into a Malibu. We're gonna tangent here because that scene pissed me off so much. It was clearly an SS for the longest time, and then they didn't even shy away. It was a close-up scene right in front of the Chevy Malibu that they happened to glue a couple of vents on the side, bad-looking vents, by the way, when you could clearly see it was a Malibu with a completely different window trim. It bothers me to no end because I get that you don't want to scrap a Chevy SS because they're expensive, but man, why can't you just get a pre-production one from GM? You got an M plate to start with. You could catch an M plate if you looked real closely during that chase. It was an M plate SS. You couldn't get like a pre-production one? It doesn't make sense to me.
Not in the budget.
Anyway, tangent over. We're not going to talk about chips anymore. We're going to talk about weird Casino Royale cars because I fell down
There's a
a
lot of them.
Yeah.
I fell down a rabbit hole when I was doing research. There were, of course, a ton of really nice cars sitting around Montenegro because it's Montenegro. But there was one that I noticed and couldn't identify at first until I looked it up online. It looked like just a big luxury sedan, like a Mercedes or something. But in reality, this was something called a ZIL 710. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right because I don't really know that much about it other than this is a Soviet luxury car. A luxury car from Russia, which I didn't even know was a thing. The company showed up a few times in Bond as commercial trucks, but it shows up in this one scene as a luxury vehicle, and it's pretty rare. There were only 50 made. It's super popular as a model car because it's really heavy and robust. How heavy, you ask? About 6,500 pounds. This isn't a bulletproof car or anything. It's just a luxury car that's insanely heavy. They only built 50 of these, and a few of them were made just for James Bond, just for this movie. It blows my mind that they produce cars for this movie, and then just to sell some model cars, basically.
Probably because nobody else was buying them. I mean, let's put it this way: if you're in the market for a high-end luxury car, are you going to buy this really weird, obscure Soviet car that looks like it was designed in the 70s, or are you going to buy a brand new BMW, or a brand new Audi, or a Mercedes, or a Lexus, or even a Land Rover would be a better choice at that point? Like, at least you can get parts for a Land Rover, right?
I would import a Toyota Century before I would buy that.
Oh, absolutely.
It didn't make sense. I don't know why it was there, but among all the beautiful cars, there was a Bentley, there was Maseratis, there was Porsches. You had this weird ZIL, and it confuses me, but it's still awesome.
I'm still not on the fact that car is like 6,500 pounds. That's insane. My God, how do you tow that thing? If it breaks down, you're screwed. It's there.
You might need to get the tow truck.
Oh my God! Yeah, right. Jeez.
Some say that's what they actually have to pull in a tractor pull.
That's the top weight class. You have to pull a ZIL.
That is kind of a neat story that they were like, please take our cars, put them in your movie. No one will recognize them.
For this one little scene that nobody is going to notice among all the Bentleys, put it there.
Because it won't stick out.
Worst product placement ever. Still a neat story, though.
Yeah.
But I don't think the worst product placement in Bond, as we smoothly transition and segue to
Heineken. Heineken.
Okay,
By the way, I'm drinking Dogfish Head here.
Way to beat my. Okay, never mind. That's not the most obnoxious product placement, but they did break out one thing that does bother me about films: several concept cars. And the whole point of a product placement, ladies and gentlemen, is to sell cars. So what is the point of a product placement of a car like the Aston Martin DB10 that you have no intention of building and selling? You built the one for the movie.
And then they built 11 more? Or was that the DB10 or the DB11?
I think they actually built a few DB10s as DB11s. They didn't look like this. So
no, because they built that car and then they built, I think, 10 of them because it's the DB10 and then sold them for some ridiculous, insane amount of money just so they could say, oh, it was a real car. This is the antithesis, by the way, of the BMW 750iL.
Yes.
That will stand out no matter where you go.
That very much stands out because you stare at that Aston brand new Aston Martin, you think, what the hell is that? So that brings me, again, we're transitioning to the segment of car swap, where I'm going to take a car and have a better choice. So at the
Oh, good, because I have a movie we can use for that. But go ahead.
Anyway, so the later in Skyfall, Bond switches over to a DB5, and that was the whole moment where you're going back to the past. So I'm thinking, why not make that an even cooler moment, and let's deviate from Aston Martin, kind of like a la Pierce, and then be able to make that joke later in the film of going back to Aston Martin and Bond feeling at home. So we're going to put him in one of my favorite sports cars, because if this is somehow less obnoxious than the Aston Martin, we're going into a Jaguar F-Type V8. Why? Because it's Bond. And yes, put him in an orange one. Make it as ridiculous as possible. This is somehow going to stand out less than a concept Aston Martin. I know the bad guy's driving a Jaguar. Again, could make a pretty funny moment where you got Jag on Jag chase, another stupid concept, by the way. And
you know what the stupidest thing about using that car was? The original car was an electric car. It was an electric hybrid built by Williams Engineering, aka the Formula One team. They built it like 5 years before the movie, and then for the movie, they're like, let's just throw a V8 in there, and then we'll put the bad guy in it, because at the time, and this is the problem with your whole, using the F-Type, is as good of an idea as it is, marketing, because that was when Jaguar was in the middle of their, villains drive Jags, and they had Tom Hiddleston doing all their ads.
So I have to know, if you have two Jaguars racing off, would that be considered a Jag-off?
No,
that's
it's called a breakdown.
All right, I'm gonna go.
No, it's called a breakdown in the making.
The better question is, if you have this Jag-off in the movie, does that immediately knock it up to NC-17? Do you then have to cut that scene? Is that why they didn't use a Jag?
Oh my
Jag
god!
race?
Oh.
Ladies and gentlemen, the most sexual episode of Cars and Popcorn ever.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Hide the children.
Starting off well, ladies and gentlemen. Starting off well.
Oh, man. All right. So I want your opinion on this one. So, License to Kill, which is pretty infamous for a lot of people loving or hating it, but it deviates a lot. It also features what is universally considered one of the worst Bond cars, which is the Lincoln Continental Mark 7 is the car he drives. Which is, I mean, it's nice if you're a retiree in Florida. Not so nice if you're a, secret agent. So what would you replace that with?
But it blends in.
That's the one. Yes.
I mean, look at that thing. It blends in so well. I mean, come on. It's America in 1986. Like, that was literally the best car you could buy.
I
mean, it was good for its time, but yeah, looking at it today, it's like, what the hell were they thinking?
I mean,
honestly,
was it good for its time?
It had a Mustang engine, which in 1986, that was about as good as it got. 250 horsepower, Tom. 250.
You know what? Then put him in a Fox body.
It was a Fox body though, because it was based off of the Mustang chassis was their only rear drive chassis. So it is a Mustang with a fat suit.
What I'm saying is go full Fox body Mustang.
Honestly, you know what I would pick as a replacement to answer Bill's question? A Bentley. Bentley Arnage, I think, is what they made at the time. Or no, the Bentley Turbo. The Bentley Turbo R. It was a V8 with a giant turbo on it just to make it move. That seems appropriate. Or if you want to go super ridiculous, Aston Martin Lagonda.
Ooh, that. But do we? Really
I don't care that they weren't making them at the time. It could just be one of those things like, "Hey, look what we just happen to have sitting around here."
Please,
yeah, because Q pops up like, Q pops up with like all the random crap he just like stuffed under his shirt. It would be entirely appropriate for them to have an Aston Martin Lagonda that they were going to do something with and then never did, and then Q just happens to have access to it and gives it to Bond as his car. that would totally fit the plot. So I'm going to go with that. Aston Martin Lagonda.
Yeah, that's probably a good answer. You have to put the Aston Martin Lagonda on camera, and that's my only reason to say don't do that. But
and the camera's broken.
Oh God, make it go away. Camera
it has a face that makes even a mother puke. It's not a good looking car, but it is very, very, it's cool because of how ambitious it was. That's a car that they couldn't even build today, and Aston Martin tried to do it in the 70s. I mean, credit to them. Credit where it's due. They tried hard.
That's fair. But speaking of controversial cars with Bond, Curly and Bill, I want to get your guys' opinion on a certain Pierce car that basically ruffled everyone's feathers by not being a fancy Aston Martin. What are your guys' thoughts on the BMW Z8?
That is the only reason to remember the BMW Z8.
That's fair.
I mean, the car itself was. Top Gear did a really good review on the Alpina version, and they saying this as having never driven. I think they're spot on. It had no idea what it was going to be. Was it a cruiser? Was it a sports car? Was it, was it for looks or was it for performance? And they never really figured it out. And I think the answer is right. It is a car that you look at because I've seen a couple of them, and every single time one drives by, you do a double take. You go, what is that? And then you realize what it is. And you're like, that's so cool.
It's a good looking car. I've never driven one. I don't know if it's any good or not, but it's good looking. I don't know whether it's because of Bond, but it's worth so much money.
And I think the only reason it's well remembered at all is because it was a Bond car. Like in many ways, it's like the BMW Z1. It's like, oh, it has cool doors, but that's the only redeeming feature of it. The Z8, it was a Bond car, and actually, to be fair, it was a good Bond car. It didn't last long, but it had some badass toys on it.
Yeah. And wait, that was the one from The World's Not Enough, right?
Yes, it was.
Yes. So that was the one.
If no one's noticed, I have my giant "World Is Not Enough" poster.
Oh, I didn't notice that. Oh my God.
World Is Not Enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if I remember correctly, that was the one that was sliced in half.
Yes. Yes.
And that is the only time in Bond history he actually remarks on the car getting destroyed and Q's response. When it actually happens and he's like, wow, Q's really going to be pissed.
He's not going to like this.
The only time ever in any of the movies he's actually remarked on something like that, where it would be Q's response to it. So, I don't know. So, maybe it's memorable for that reason alone. I don't know. So
I think that's the only... you know what? I will say this. So, first of all, The World Is Not Enough is the very first Bond movie I ever saw. I saw it in 2000, I think. It was after it had come out, but my friend showed it to me. That was the first movie I'd seen all the way through. So I still really enjoy this. I mean, it gets made fun of because of Denise Richards, but she kind of made sense in 1999. But if you ignore that, the plot is very relevant for 1999. What are we worried about? We're worried about another oil crisis. We're worried about these giant, conglomerates. And actually, all the Pierce villains, all the villains, plot aside, they were all relevant for the 90s. You've got the North Koreans, which are relevant now. You've got the Russians, relevant now. You've got mass media, relevant now. And you got oil tycoons, relevant now. It's the most relevant set of villains ever in James Bond.
But not only that, that movie also features the longest pre-title sequence ever in a Bond movie, because that's 15, 16 solid minutes. But it's really well done with the boat chase and going all throughout everything. That is a really wonderfully done scene.
I think World Is Not Enough gets a lot of flack, and it's not deserved, because if you ignore Denise Richards and her, sort of reputation, there's and John Cleese, because he is kind of goofy, but I thought he was the great anti-Q. He did not try to copy Desmond Llewellyn because it's not possible.
Yeah,
and he's goofy, but he was goofy in a way that he was still very much a nerd.
And honestly, I think The World Is Not Enough. It's fine. It's a fine Pierce movie. I would say Die Another Day is the worst one of his entry.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's another one where it's got some of, I think Die Another Day has some of the greatest action sequences in any Bond movie. They're just surrounded by a really terrible plot.
Well, it was because it was the big anniversary, and they overstuffed it. They're trying to put in so many nods and like hat tips to everything out, and it becomes a muddled kind of mess. And it was really bad CGI even for the time with the parachuting surfing scene.
Wasn't there the skiing scene in that one too?
Yep.
But I remember that movie for two things because I was a teenager when I first saw it. I remember it for Halle
Berry's boobs.
Halle Berry, yeah.
Yep. Halle Berry, and it was the reason I fell in love with the Aston Martin Vanquish.
I think that is another car that is only so cool because it was a Bond car. Like it's okay, but in the pantheon of Aston Martin, it's not really up there like the DB5. Also, DB5, probably another car that's really famous because of James Bond. Like again, a good car, but would it be iconic if it wasn't for James Bond? I would argue.
That was actually a question I was going to ask you guys, was whether you think that the DB5 or any Aston Martin for that matter would be anything without James Bond. I don't think Aston Martin actually as a company would be anything without James Bond.
No,
I completely agree because
like
I was saying about the Living Daylights, they went through a very rough period in the 70s and early 80s, and they weren't in any Bond movies. Now they're in all the Bond movies and they're doing awesome.
Oh man, what if there was an alternate world where the DB5 was never picked as Connery's car and it just became this niche collector car that faded into the realms of time, and we never saw another Aston Martin?
I don't want to live in that world.
It is the darkest timeline.
It is a very dark timeline. Or for that matter, Lotus, if they hadn't picked the Esprit. Bond is a franchise. It doesn't matter if it's an actor or a product, except for Heineken. If you're in Bond, you will always be associated with that, and you will always be part of that legacy.
That's the reason why Jaguar is seen as bad guy cars. That all started in the Pierce era.
Oh, absolutely. And that is one of the all-time great Bond cars. Again, the XK, as we've seen in the Grand Tour, is not a great car on its own, but it is an awesome Bond car. Wrong XK, but still an XK.
So still, it's an awesome XK, and it was the thing I could find at the last minute making this PowerPoint. So it's the one we're rolling with.
So one of my favorite things about the Vanquish and the XKR in that movie is the movie cars actually work. So they actually had an Aston Martin, an XKR convertible with the giant machine gun mounted on it and all the rockets that stuck out of the grill. And I remember this because somewhere I have an AutoWeek article where they actually got to drive the movie car. And I think my favorite line from it was, it was on a closed course because they weren't street legal. And the guy said he was driving around and he couldn't find any of the buttons that like specifically said rockets or anything. He's like, the emergency flasher or the panic button. I wonder if that would do anything. He didn't push it, but like, wouldn't you? But yeah, obviously the weapons didn't shoot or anything, but the fact that they had the cars and just like the DB5 from Goldfinger, everything was actually built on the car and the car still worked. That was kind of cool. Now underneath, they actually ripped out the V12 and the rear wheel drive. The drivetrain's actually from a Ford Explorer on the Aston Martin. I'm pretty sure it's the same on the XKR because they were driving them on ice. So they needed the 4-wheel drive and they couldn't fit the 4-wheel drive with the V12. So they just took an Ford Explorer SUV drivetrain, stuck it under the cars. And that's what they used for the stunt cars that actually drove on the ice, which they actually did a lot of that driving and spinning and stunting, which again, pretty damn cool. Bad CGI, but the actual stunts they did were pretty impressive.
Definitely impressive to try and jam a Ford Explorer into an Aston Martin body.
Yeah, it worked, and the cars actually drove, and AutoWeek got to drive them.
And this was the early 2000s, so they risked life and limb with those tires on that snow.
But they had studded tires, and they actually, and again, I haven't read this article in at least 10 years, and I have it somewhere in this apartment, but they specifically said they started with like rally tires, and they were so sticky they couldn't get the cars to do the 360s and the donuts that they wanted, so they had to like cut down on the number of studs that they used. Yeah, they actually all of that driving was real. I think the scene where they flipped the car on its roof and then flipped it back, I'm pretty sure that was real. You know, for all the bad CGI, there's a lot of good that's in Die Another Day. It's one of those moments that it's or one of those movies that's got a lot of really great like pieces, but as a whole, it sort of doesn't work.
Kind of like Spectre.
Very much agreed. Spectre has a lot of great moments, but all put together doesn't really work, which is a shame because they had everything there. How do you go wrong with Christoph Waltz?
How do you go wrong with Dave Bautista?
By not having them in the movie at all.
Yes, that is true.
Having them in for basically 5 seconds each.
That's been one of my complaints about the Craig movies, and it's not Daniel Craig. It's the biggest problem is the writing. They've had great villains in at least 3 of the Craig Bond movies, but they don't do anything with them. Like they don't appear for half of the movie, and then when they do appear, they don't do anything. Like, how do you screw up Javier Bardem?
Yeah, it's like an hour until he shows up in the Skyfall.
Oh, and he is a wonderful villain.
Oh, he's great. Yeah.
Oh God,
that's part of that movie.
You know, the tension between him and Bond, and especially the sort of gay sexual tension, I thought was very clever and very well done.
And in Spectre, that was probably the reason I hate Spectre the most. I was super excited when they brought Christoph Waltz, and I'm like, oh hell yeah, this is gonna be amazing. And then they have him hiding in the shadows for a little bit during the meeting, and have him in the last 5 minutes of the movie blow him up, and oh no, he's Blofeld, and we're done. They misuse him, but at least we had the moment in Spectre, as we smooth segue once again, where they had a really sweet parking lot in Spectre.
Oh my God, I can't believe I didn't notice the EB-110 before.
Whoa, you that's perfect, because guess what the first slide is, Curly?
Well, you have it friggin' circled. How can you miss it now? Come on.
If they had this in daylight, you would have a hard time missing it.
And they would have probably broken the camera.
But did you catch this gem sitting up here right in front of that Bond park next to?
But I'm not even looking at that car. I'm actually looking at the car behind it. Because the car behind it is a Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing, which that is what interests me.
That is a Gullwing back there. I mean, the McLaren is amazing. And
I love that SLR, but a Gullwing. Oh.
You also had the Porsche 959.
How did you find a picture that it said pre-owned on the license plate?
Google, my friends, Google.
Yeah, there's been some good car spotting, and you know what? I think I bet it's like one of those. They just put out just a flyer like, put your car in a Bond movie. I wonder how many of those are going to go for sale. Is like, was seen in Spectre, and they'll have exactly the pictures that you just showed.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I would. You kidding?
Oh, so would I. Crap, I don't care what it is. If they pick my car to be in a Bond movie, I'm like, go ahead and flip it over and crush it. Go right ahead.
Random factoid. I was just reading the other day that there was legitimately several people that sold their cars at huge markups because they were in Abbey Road. They swear.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, the Abbey Road photo from the album. Yep.
So many cars being sold as they were Abbey Road cars.
What's funny, I was talking, very, very short tangent. I was talking to someone the other day about we were talking about the really crappy national anthem that just got sung by whoever was Fergie. And I was talking about how Steven Tyler did the national anthem to the Indy 500 in the early 2000s. And instead of singing the Home of the Brave, he sang Home of the Indianapolis 500. That's how that conversation started. But he opened that national anthem by playing a piece of it on the harmonica, and he threw the harmonica into the crowd. And I remember on a show in Pawn Stars, this guy was trying to sell a harmonica that he said was Steven Tyler's harmonica, and they didn't buy it because they said, well, it's a generic harmonica. There's no way of telling whether or not it's Steven Tyler's. How do I know you don't have a trunk full of these things? It's the same with Abbey Road. I'm sure it'll be the same with some of these cars. Like, that was my Bugatti, or that was my Mercedes. Like, okay, it's the right color, but how can you prove it was your car?
On that note, you mentioned the Bugatti. I don't think anyone needs help selling their EV110 or their
No,
Porsche
probably not.
959 or their
Or
Porsche
their
959.
or their Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing.
The McLaren,
Fun
though.
fact. I want to say fun fact on the 300 SL. The cockpit is so cramped, the steering wheel actually flips up, and you have to flip it up to get into the car. And I remember, I can't remember where I read this, but I remember someone had the opportunity to drive one of them, and the owner said, "I will let you drive this car if you can figure out how to get into it." And that person happened to know the steering wheel flipped up. So he flipped up the steering wheel, sat in the car, got in. The guy's like, "Crap! All right, go ahead and drive it."
Yeah, that is one of those things where it's basically impossible to prove unless you were although I think you'd have a better chance with that scene than you would with Abbey Road, because you have to approve of your car being in that scene. So you have to have documentation that you were paid, you had a receipt for that car being there. They have to pay you.
Mhm.
So
yeah, and if
I'm
you're
sure it was
smart,
there.
I mean, if you're a smart owner, you trade that little paycheck for documentation that your car VIN number, whatever, was the one shown in this scene, because that is worth so much more than the couple of $1,000s they're going to give you for having your car on screen.
I don't think, like I said, I don't think it's going to help with like the Gullwing and the 959, but that McLaren, that automatically jacks up the price another
I mean,
50, 100
provenance
grand.
makes a big difference. I mean, Rowan Atkinson's McLaren F1 still sold for insane money, despite the fact that it was totaled twice.
And some random
Because it was
asshole
Rowan
sold,
Atkinson.
and some random asshole sold his McLaren F1 for 20 million. They just keep ratcheting that up. It doesn't matter whose McLaren F1 it was.
I mean, it's going to keep going up, but having provenance always makes the car worth more money. You know,
That's fair.
Yeah. So
Jeez, I'm in the wrong racket. Of course.
You know, you bring that up genuinely. If you're clever, if you buy some of the sort of unloved cars from the early 2000s and late 90s, now is the time to buy them. They are as cheap as they will ever be, and they will start going up. And if you can find one that has provenance, that it's worth even more money. That's your daily stock tip for the day. Don't buy stocks. Buy old cars that are rare and will eventually be desirable. Thinking ahead.
All right.
I'm gonna amend that with, please do not listen to Curly for financial advice. This is terrible advice. Do not do that.
Just because I have one car that doesn't run, another that one's beat up, another one that doesn't run and is rusty, a moped and a mini bike that sometimes run when they want to, doesn't mean I don't know how to spend my money. All right?
Okay. All right. Yeah. That sounds like a little opposite of that, but whatever. So.
But if you do want quick consumer advice on future collectibles, Alpha 4C and Chevy SS. That's all I got there.
Completely agree.
Anyway, any more notes that you guys had for this episode? I think we're kind of winding down here.
Yes.
I do want to briefly talk about again the Pierce movies, the BMW Z3 from Golden. Talk about a car that really needs to make more of an appearance. If you look at the lists of worst Bond cars, it always shows up, and for the exact same reason. It completely is underutilized. Like you can see they set up for, they're going to have this awesome chase because Q tells them about all the cool stuff in it. It's got all this typical Bond gadgets. And then it shows up for about 30 seconds where the American dude lands his plane. Then they swap the plane with the car and he drives off. And that's all you see of the car. It's a car that had great potential and they didn't do anything with it. Though to be fair, there was no room for it in that movie. I would not change anything else about GoldenEye to fit a car chase in there, or I should say another car chase in there. I will take the tank and train chases over a Z3 chase any day of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. That tank chase is amazing.
Oh, it absolutely.
That's fantastic.
One of the things I liked about Pierce Brosnan as a Bond is he combines the best parts of Sean Connery. Well, he combines the best parts of all the Bonds before him into one perfect package because, he does that part where he busts through the wall with the tank, and then he's parked there looking around. He just adjusts his eye. Like that is very much a Roger Moore thing, but he does it with the suaveness of Sean Connery. You know, he's just got all of these elements combined together that make him, for me, he is the perfect Bond.
And that's why it bothers me when people say that Pierce wasn't a good Bond. He was probably the most suave of the Bonds. He had the most natural charisma. He's probably the most believable ladies' man of all of them.
Absolutely. And he was, you know, it's kind of a weird comparison, but he is the one out of all the 6 people who have played James Bond, he's the one I'd like to sit down and have a drink. Because, you know, he just sort of seems like one of those guys you can sit down and just have a cool conversation with. You know, I feel like Sean Connery's just kind of a kooky old man at this point, but all the others are kind of sort of, I feel like, too stuck up. Timothy Dalton would be a very close second. If I had a choice, it would be Pierce. I'd have a vodka martini with him.
And Cal in the chat actually agrees with us that Pierce is his favorite. And I mean, just look at that poster behind you, Curly. Look at that look that he's giving.
He's just, again, he's got the suaveness of Sean Connery. He can still be funny like Roger Moore. You know, he can be vulnerable and injured like Timothy Dalton and Daniel Craig. And, you know, he actually shows some level of like caring for these women that he saves. They're not just disposable characters, which is very much a George Lazenby trait. George Lazenby got married as Bond.
He did for all of 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily, well, he's James Bond. Of course, it was his fault that his wife got shot. Yeah, he at least settled down. You know, Pierce at least shows some level of commitment. You know, obviously he ends up with a new woman in every couple of scenes, but still, I think I've just destroyed my own argument there. Point withdrawn.
Wah, 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 wah. I did have another note with the Craig movies that as I was watching, there was a scene right before a train scene where I forget what Land Rover, I think it was the Defender truck, which actually that reminds me of another note from the Craig movies. So they featured Land Rovers a lot in all of the Daniel Craig movies. And I believe it was Skyfall. Yes, it was Skyfall, where they had this really sweet Land Rover Defender crew cab truck. And
the Defender 110.
When I look at this truck, I think, man, why did Land Rover never bring this vehicle to the United States and charge $150,000 for it? Because rich people would buy the crap out of that. I see so many Mercedes G-Wagons riding around here, lux it up a bit, bring it over to the U.S. just like Mercedes.
You don't even have to go with rich people. I mean, you know, Tom, you worked at Chrysler. How friggin' popular is the Jeep Wrangler? That is the British, really the European Jeep Wrangler right there. And, you know, Jeep only this year, or what is it, next year, making a big deal about the new Jeep truck. You know, Land Rover's been making those for decades.
Yeah, and just look at that thing. If you brought that over, rich people, because you'd have to mark it up a lot, it's an expensive vehicle, rich people would buy that up.
It's actually not. I mean, they were made as farm trucks. It literally has the same, the Land Rover, which eventually became the Defender, has the exact same origin story as the Jeep Wrangler that we know today. It started as a military vehicle in World War II, and then they turned it into a farm truck, and then people started driving them on the street because looking like you were a farmer was cool. So the Defenders were actually very cheap. Now, importing them would make them a lot more expensive, but it would basically be a rare Jeep Wrangler, and they came with a diesel, and long before Jeep had a 4-door. So the Defender you have on there is a 110. It's the long wheelbase with 4 doors. The shorter ones were 90, and that's the length of the wheelbase. And they've been doing that, again, for years, decades, long before Jeep ever thought of doing it. So Land Rover could have easily cut into the market that Jeep has a stranglehold on right now if they could have brought those over for more than 2 years. I completely agree. I would not have bought a Toyota Tacoma if I could have bought a Land Rover Defender last year. I would have absolutely bought a Defender. They are just so friggin' cool.
they're super cool, super capable. It's insane that it's taking them this long to bring it over. And it's funny you mentioned Diesel, because that's the point. That's the note I actually made. I was watching this Defender during one of the chase scenes. It rolled up on top of a flatbed that was carrying 3 Volkswagen Beetles and just drove over these random Volkswagen Beetles. And I thought to myself, man, films and just car destruction scenes would be a perfect use for some of these Dieselgate cars that they don't feel like fixing. They're just sitting there in parking lots rotting. Why not throw them in like a Michael Bay movie and blow them up?
Would be a good use for them. I actually had a different idea on that, but I'm not going to go into it here because it would probably take up the rest of the time in your show. the TLDR is give them to poor people. We'll move off of that. But no, that actually would be a good use. You know, especially the ones that they're not going to touch them. Then yeah, go ahead and destroy them because they're going to get crushed anyway. You might as well give them a Viking funeral, right?
Absolutely, they have to be crushed if they're not fixed. So, blow them up.
Yeah, Viking funeral.
All right, looks like we're getting close to trivia time. So, any more notes from you, Curly, or you, Bill?
No, I think I pretty much got.
Do you want to talk about the invisible car for all of 5 minutes?
No. No, I don't want to talk about the invisible car at all.
This is happening.
Yeah.
This is happening.
Majority vote.
I
mean, the Vanquish is a cool car. Yeah, the invisibility is kind of gimmicky, I think. But, well, the biggest gimmick of that is when he tries to hide behind the car. That when I was a kid, I didn't think that anything of that. But when someone brought up later, I'm like, yeah, that is kind of stupid. The car is see-through. But, you know, my biggest problem with that car is that it's got all of its weapons on the front of the car, whereas Zhao's XK has weapons on the back. Like, Vanquish is only offense. XK has defense as well. Also, those giant stabby spikes in the front. Oh, fun story. If that giant turreting machine gun on the XK, and I know we're trying to talk about the Vanquish, but it's a like 2,000 round per minute gun. In order to shoot like it did in the movie, he would have to actually be towing a trailer of ammunition. Movie magic, people. But yeah, that Vanquish. The Vanquish was a cool car, and again, I think a lot of that was because of its use as a Bond car. But you know, it gets a lot of flack for being invisible, and I thought that was kind of a poor reason for hating on it so much. Like, you know, Bond is supposed to be kind of over the top, and Die Another Day went a little bit too far into the over the top territory, but it was still a great car, and again had one of the great car chases in James Bond.
Like I am an unapologetic Roger Moore fan, and I know that a lot of people are like he's a little too ridiculous or whatever, but even I thought Die Another Day was like this is insane.
Yeah, I mean, just like Tom, I was a teenager when that, or like a young teenager when that came out. So some of those things definitely stuck with me. That over the topness stuck with me, including the invisible car.
Also, I think can we all agree worst Bond song? Like Die Another Day is a terrible Bond song.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, I hate that. I hate that with a fiery passion. Curly knows this. It angers me.
I'd rather hear the theme to License to Kill, so which was probably next to last for me.
So anyway, a wild human has shown up because we've invited in for trivia. Cal the Kingslayer. What's up, Cal?
What's going on? I think I need a new nickname for this show because you know how I have one for every single show I'm on. I just want to start out.
Man of 1,000.
Yes, I just want to start out by apologizing. I didn't get the notification, so I'm usually always here for these shows in the beginning. So I'm not gonna. This is gonna be the worst trivia ever because I didn't. I know you asked from earlier in the show, and I don't know anything about cars in the first place. So if you just ask Bond trivia, I think I'd be better at that than car trivia.
Oh, don't worry. I'm usually really good at trivia, and I bombed out the last time I did this one, so it's fine. You're going to
Yeah. Tom is really good at making you guys squirm, which is why I made him squirm in the Mad Max episode.
Yes, I enjoyed that because he had trouble somewhat.
Good. That was
Yes,
by design.
Yes, I looked like an idiot. I told Curly make them as hard as possible for that very reason. And it's for that very reason that I've completely revised the formula. And by the way, Curly, you'll find in your email the trivia questions I just sent, so you can participate in these in dealing out some questions.
All right.
So the format's been revised, and because no one got 5 out of 5 last year, which made me sad. But there will still be that bonus for if anyone gets the 5 questions right. But this year, I kind of borrowed a little bit. Been watching a lot of Schmodown lately, so I'm borrowing a bit of elements from them, where every question now, still 5 questions each person, but they're now going to be worth 2 points. If you know the answer right up front, say it, you're correct, you get 2 points. It's going to allow for more variation. But if you don't know, you're kind of blanking, you can go to multiple choice and still earn 1 point. Going to make it a lot easier. And a lot more point spread, I think. So,
all right,
it's gonna be fun. Curly, have you received the list?
Yes, I've got them open.
Sweet. So I'm going to start out with our guest, Cal. Let's see. All right, Cal. We're gonna start with my first question here, which Pierce Brosnan was at the center of Bond controversy for driving what non-British brand of car?
Is there more to that question, or is that it?
That's it.
Okay.
We talked about all 3 of them, by the way.
Well, I just got in like at the end of the show, so I missed it. I'm gonna have to say it's between 2.
Would you like multiple choice?
No, because then I lose a point, don't I?
And
I'm guessing 2 of the ones I want is going to be in the multiple choice. It seems like that Who Wants to Be a Millionaire thing where like, all right, I'm just going to go with BMW.
BMW is correct.
Woo!
2 points to Cal. All right, Curly, would you like to ask Bill his first question?
Certainly. So, let's see.
All right, let's do this.
Okay, I believe we talked about this one earlier. Pierce Brosnan's personal car was featured in GoldenEye. What was the make and model of that car?
That was Pierce Brosnan's own car, clarify.
His personal car.
Mike. Hey, Google. No. Let's take that multiple choice. Jesus Lord. Okay.
All right, so your 4 options are the BMW Z8, the Aston Martin Vanquish, BMW Z3, or the Aston Martin DB. Now, Tom, you have DBS on here. I think you mean DB5 for GoldenEye.
Yes, I believe
know that's out. Okay. So that limits it. It's going to be one of the BMWs. I feel like we just said it by name. I'm going with option 3.
The Z3?
Yeah.
Tom, you didn't highlight which one was right.
but you know that's correct, Curly.
Yes, I do. But you still didn't highlight which one was correct. That one I knew, but some of the others I might not. So I'm going to defer to Tom.
That's why I'm here. Anyway,
all right, there's a couple of bumps in the road here.
But yes, I did actually mean DBS. That's what we call a throwaway answer, Curly.
Okay. Got it.
See, I wouldn't have known that was a fake answer, though.
Yeah, see, DB5 would have been more clever. Because if I wasn't paying attention, that's what I would have guessed.
Okay, full disclosure, I made these trivia questions while watching Quantum of Solace, so I was a bit tired.
And bored, probably, too. Yeah.
I mean, it was perfect timing.
All right. I'm not sure if we discussed this while Cal was on, but Cal, we're going to go to question 2. Aston Martin created a concept car specifically for, I wrote Skyfall but mistyped, for Spectre. What was that car called?
Oh man, I wish I was watching earlier. Okay, Spectre. All the newer Bonds I haven't seen. I've only seen one. So all the older ones with Pierce, I've seen like several times. So this is the one with Daniel Craig, right?
Yes.
And I didn't say it in chat, did I?
I don't know if you did or not.
Let's just call it the Vanquish.
It was not the Vanquish. Curly, would you like to answer that one?
It was the Aston Martin DB10.
Okay.
All right. Next, Bill's question.
All right. This is question number 3 on your list, Tom. The Aston Martin Vanquish S, as seen in our favorite movie, Quantum of Solace, has how many cylinders?
A favorite of this show.
12.
12 is correct.
12. This is the easiest cylinder question ever because Aston Martin has only ever built V8s or V12s.
See, I actually knew that one. 'Cause
I believe the DB5 is a straight Dexter.
Yes, it is. I'm sorry. Aston Martin has built only V8s and V12s in the last 30 years. Maybe
Yeah,
40 years.
Hey,
Maybe longer.
You know what? It was a Hail Mary throw up. I'm just glad I got it. So. All right.
All right. Now on to Cal. So we're going to go with question 5 on my list. Aston Martin gave Daniel Craig a special edition of what model Aston Martin to celebrate the company's 100th anniversary?
The Vantage.
So close. You did mention this one in the chat. It was the Vanquish.
I was gonna say Vanquish again, but like, there's no way he's gonna ask me that again. That's the only one I knew. I'm like, let me try something else.
All right. Next question.
All right. Timothy Dalton drove a convertible sports car, not in a James Bond movie, but in the movie Hot Fuzz. Hot Fuzz. Who made that car?
That's what OEM, so car company.
Multiple choice.
All right. Your options are Porsche, Jaguar, Chevrolet, or Mazda.
I'm gonna go out on a limb because I don't remember because it's been a while, but I think it might have something to do with the tie-in to the bad guy joke. So I'm gonna go Jaguar.
It's been a while since I've seen Hot Fuzz.
That is a good derivation because it's absolutely correct. It was the Jaguar, and I believe they were trying to give off that bad guy because that's something Edgar Wright does.
He does, yeah. Oh,
okay. Let's see. What do I want to give Cal? I don't know if Cal's seen this one, but we're gonna go with another movie tie-in. So Daniel Craig got to drive what American muscle car in the movie Logan Lucky?
Oh, I did not see that.
oh, it's a shame. That's a good one.
I was gonna watch it the other day too because you told me it was good. All right,
It's fantastic.
American muscle car.
Yes.
Oh god, I don't even know what a muscle car is. That's like what Vin
Aston
Diesel.
Martin V8 Vantage.
No, that's definitely not American muscle. I'm gonna have to go with the Challenger.
It was actually a Ford Mustang, more specifically a Mustang GT350. Really cool car. On the poster too.
Is that a Shelby or no?
Yes.
Oh crap.
The full name is Ford Mustang Shelby GT350, which is very wordy and
Was is Challenger a muscle car?
yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I should get a half
Probably-
for that. For
Probably
knowing that.
probably more so than the Mustang, but people like the word muscle car. It just fits with American cars. Anyway, Curly, next question.
All these are going to be really easy for Bill. All right, you can't look at your notes for this one. In the Living Daylights,
Okay.
in the Living Daylights, Timothy Dalton drove an Aston Martin V8 Volante through the entire movie. How many different cars were used?
Now, I guess the question is, does that include like the fake ones for props? Or just working cars?
That'd be working cars.
Just working cars, it was 3.
That was in fact 3.
Yeah.
2 points to Bill. Okay. Oh, okay. Cal might be able to pick this one up because we talked about this really late. What was the most controversial secret gadget of Pierce Brosnan's V12 Vanquish?
Can you repeat that because you cut out?
What was the most controversial secret gadget in Pierce Brosnan's V12 Vanquish?
That turned invisible? Or like camouflage, active camouflage?
Points for using the actual name of the gadget. Active camouflage is correct. 2 points to Cal.
All right, Tom, I'm going to defer to your questions here. He's either had it too easy or he's been really friggin' lucky. GoldenEye, because I have that page open in my book. GoldenEye, the post-credits chase is between an Aston Martin DB5 and a Ferrari. What is the model of that Ferrari?
The model is multiple choice. There's just no way to know that.
All right. So I'm making this question up on the spot. So a Ferrari F50, a Ferrari F355, a Ferrari Enzo, or a Ferrari Daytona?
Can you repeat those?
So F50, F355, Enzo, or Daytona?
Daytona?
Yes, got him. It was
That's not even a real Ferrari, is it?
That is a real Ferrari.
Daytona GTB, considered one of the most beautiful cars ever made.
Can I steal or no?
Well, now that you know the answer, yeah, go right ahead.
No, I don't know the answer. I was just I would have probably said Enzo, but that's probably not right.
It was the F355.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because the question Tom had on here was way too easy. It's what model Aston Martin did Timothy Dalton drive in the living daylights? And Remington Steele eventually.
You already said that in the one of the previous answers.
Yeah,
one of the previous questions.
I couldn't give that to you. Not in good conscience.
That's fair.
And that, I believe, rounds out the questions. Both of you guys did actually a pretty decent showing. So Cal made out of that with 4 points. Bill made out of that with 6. So Bill, you're in the early lead.
Yeah, all right.
That's 4 more than I thought I'd get.
But Cal, thanks for stepping up. So I'm going to give you
5 more than I thought I was going to get. So don't feel bad.
So as we wrap up, Cal, I will give you the first opportunity for promotion. Go ahead,
cool.
Plug what you got.
Yeah, in like 35 minutes, I'll be streaming on YouTube, doing another episode of Kingslayer. We'll be playing Monster Hunter with Randall and Nightshame. So come check us out if you enjoy that stuff. And tomorrow you'll be on, hopefully, with us for Aftermath. And then every other week after that, it's probably going to be some Gamer Grudge. And we have Flashpoints coming back on this Friday. So since Flash returns after a little mid-season hiatus, we'll have Flashpoints on Friday. And you can find me on Twitter at VeerangerDejaVu and subscribe to the Kingslayer Network, please.
All right. Thanks, Cal. So, Bill, what do you got going on?
You can follow me on Twitter at Philadelphia, PA. You can also follow the show, which is at Destroy Research. The show is Research and Destroy. I have a new episode I just put up over this weekend with Tom and Kimber from Odd Shape Panel. We had a long discussion on Batman the Animated Series, so that ended up being a lot of fun. And yeah, that's about it.
And you will find the link to Bill's channel for Research and Destroy in the description below. So please check that out. And I'll be adding Cal's to the description once I get to that, honestly. So it will be added later. It will be down there eventually. And finally, Curly, what do you have going on in your life?
So first of all, Philadelphia is a great Twitter handle. Too much.
Gotta rep the home team, man. Go Birds. Go Eagles. Go Eagles. Yeah.
I have too much going on in my life, but as far as this is concerned, MotoIQ.com. I don't usually do video, though I will be doing some video in the next couple of months because we're going to be doing a test on my pickup truck, and it's going to require video. So not something that you guys aren't used to on YouTube reading. I write articles on MotoIQ.com. Curly's Corner is my column on Formula One, which will be making a return very soon because Formula One's about to restart. This week, I'm actually going to be publishing a piece on my mini bike, aka the Doodle Bug of Doom. And actually, this weekend I decided I'm going to attend one, if not two, Gambler 500 rallies with it, which is a off-road rally using really cheap beat-up vehicles and or mini bikes. And I've decided I'm going to do that with mini bike. I've got some other coverage I've been working on. I've got a whole bunch of stuff in the queue, but I just either haven't had the time or ambition to finish. So I'm working on that. But MotoIQ.com is my writing. And then you can also follow me on Instagram at Ragged Budget Racing, all one word, where you will basically get a preview of what I'm doing on MotoIQ and also cat pictures.
Curly posts a lot of cat pictures. I can tell you that from experience on his Instagram.
Yeah,
And
I think 100% of my selfies, half of them are cat selfies, half of them are race car selfies.
That's plenty fair, and I mean, if you're on the internet, those are two things that are going to get a lot of likes. And of course, you'll find Curly's Corner, the latest one of Abu Dhabi. I believe that was the last one I could find, down in the description. So be sure to check out some of his stuff on MotoIQ if that's something you're interested in. And of course, you'll find me on Twitter at RoadRaider3. Please like and subscribe and do all the other YouTube things with this video. It would be greatly appreciated. And we'll be back in a couple weeks with something, because I once again have not planned ahead. So
how many times has Bond been has oh my, how many times has someone tried to assassinate Bond? Dick first. That's your backup topic.
Episode on the jack-off race. That'd be great.
Yeah, stay tuned for the Jag-Off Dick episode of Cars and Popcorn. And on that bombshell, it's time to end. Good night, folks.
Yeah.